How's going, guys? Welcome to the channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto was the immortal sage of the dead and built Harem in HOTD, Part 2. Huge shout out to Methos QB777 for this story. If you wants to see awesome fanfiction like this, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's get into the video. Alice, run and hide. Don't let them find you. The father of Alice smiled and breathed his last. The girl's breath hitched. Papa! She tried to shake him. When he didn't respond, she let loose her tears. Papa! She cried out, alerting the undead to her location. As the things approached her, she shut her eyes. Suddenly she heard a strange sound. The sound was of metal cleaving through flesh. Her eyes shot open as she heard the thud of a body. Looking up, she saw a blonde-haired man flashing around the yard at speeds she couldn't comprehend. He would appear and a flash of light would pierce, or cleave through, one of the monsters. Then he would disappear again, only to reappear next to another. Her eyes widened as he appeared before her, his back facing her, and she then heard what sounded like a fountain spraying water for a quick moment. She saw a few red drops land just in front of his feet. The process only took around 3 seconds, too fast for her young mind, or the mind of any normal human to catch. He wore a crimson long coat, and in his hand she recognized a katana. In the belt on the small of his back were 2 guns, a black and a silver, contrasting each other. He then turned to her, and his orange goggles seemed to pierce into her soul. Though his stance relaxed, as he knelt down to her, his hand gently grasped her shoulder, and he asked in a caring voice, "Are you okay, little one?" She lunged at him, grabbing onto his chest and sobbing as she heard his soft and gentle tone. He wrapped his right arm around her, having sheathed his blade earlier. He whispered soothing words into her ear. Her cries would have attracted more of the undead, if it weren't for the cover fire given from afar. He allowed her to let go and turned to her father. He then pulled out what looked like a scroll, and started writing strange symbols on it. He then said to her, "We will give him a proper resting place later. We need to get out of here." His voice was colder than she preferred, but she nodded. She then picked up the puppy she had found with her father, and watched as her father disappeared in a poof of smoke. Her eyes widened again, but was unable to say anything as the blonde-haired man picked her up. "Hold on," he said before she could feel wind passing around her. Her eyes closed, due to the wind hitting them. She still felt him holding her to his chest, and sighed as she felt safer than any other time before. She then felt the wind stop, and heard a woman's voice. "Boss, did you really have to rush off like that?" She felt the rumble in his chest as he chuckled. "Rika-chan, you should know that I'll always be faster than you can fire that rifle." Alice opened her eyes, looking around to see that they were on a balcony. She then saw the woman, who was holding a rifle that she saw in her dad's old gun cabinet, though this was newer and looked in better condition. "True, though I thought you would have moved a little faster than that," the woman replied. Alice then looked away from the balcony, still held by the man. Her eyes widened as she saw the house they were at before, more than a block away. Kagero grunted as he finished the last of them in the bank. He then kicked one of the heads away, and snarled, "Damn it! That fish assured me that I could kill him!" He then grabbed his phone as it started to ring. "What?" he snarled after realizing it was from the doctor. "You're telling me to get back to base? I could put a bullet in his brain right now." He sighed a few minutes later. "Fine. I'll be there shortly," he said just before putting another round in a zombie just outside of the bank. "Stupid fish," he mumbled and walked away. Alice sat in the second-floor sitting room, not leaving Naruto's side for longer than a few moments to use the restroom. She still hadn't gotten the name of her savior, but then again, she was still shook up about her father's death. Rika had offered her some juice, which she slowly drank. She watched as Rika and Naruto looked over a map of the city. "We'll have to leave as soon as daybreak. We can't delay any longer," Naruto spoke in his cold tone. His eyes gazed at the map through his goggles. Certain areas were marked, and the bridges were crossed out after seeing the news footage. Alice cast her gaze to the map as well. She then mustered up her courage, and asked in a soft voice, Sama Mason. The two looked at her, though she flinched at the gaze of Naruto's goggles. He sighed lightly, before taking them off. She gasped as soon as he opened his eyes. They were a beautiful silvery purple. Almost pure silver. What is it, little one? He asked softly, though his tone was still a bit colder than what her father would speak to others with. Watashiwa Alice. May I ask your names? She relaxed as the two chuckled lightly. Of course, I had forgotten that I never introduced myself. Watashiwa Naruto, he said as he put his hand forward. She grasped it lightly and bowed her head. This lovely sniper here is Rika. You will soon meet the others, and our other two team members you will see in the morning. She said thank you, but then pointed to a small road on the map. Papa would take me down this road every day after school. It has a small park, and leads to an old train station, Alice said, sounding far more mature than her age would suggest, and still subdued. Naruto nodded, knowing about the old place. It was scheduled to be torn down in a few weeks. But the current world problems would make that impossible now. That could help us get across the river. But I don't know if the reckoning can fit the old crossway, he said, and nodded to Alice with the smallest upturning of his lips. What about the ATV or your bike? Rika asked. The sniper flinched as he turned his gaze to her. Are you implying that I should leave my truck here, sniper? Rika backed away at his tone, feeling like she had just poked a sleeping dragon with a stick. And no, sir. She relaxed as he turned his gaze back to the map. Good. You should know by now that my truck costed more to make than your yearly income. In a decade. She sighed in relief as he seemed to let up on the ice in his tone. Note to self, don't try to get him to leave the damn mobile barracks behind. Did he just call it a truck? It's not a freaking truck. They then heard the other ladies leaving the bathing room, whilst giggling could be heard from a few of them. Ray blushed as she entered her temporary room. She let the towel around her fall. Opening the closet, she found it full of sweat outfits and other clothing. Her E-cup frieze swayed slightly as she looked through the closet, and choosing a dark gray-colored outfit. Like most of them, it reminded her of an American SWAT officer. She sighed as she remembered what the other girls had said in the bathroom. Can I really share him with others? I'll admit that I don't have a problem with them, but am I willing to let them have the man I care for? She sighed as she reached into the drawers and pulled out some yellow undergarments. Almost like his hair. She idly noted, and noticed that they were the correct size. She dressed herself slowly, though checked herself out in the room's mirror. She grasped her frieze, and ran her right hand across her stomach. She then ran her right hand down and slid it across her shaven core. Contemplating masturbation, she sighed. She knew that she hadn't ever had sex before, but she was seriously thinking of hunting Naruto down and claiming him first. She sighed, and sat down, pulling her bare legs to her chest with arms wrapped around her knees. Laying her chin atop her arms, she stared into her reflection. She knew that she was beautiful, but she couldn't see why anyone would love her. Not with her problems. She stopped that thought, remembering that Naruto had also lost people close to him. He's lost even more than that, though. All of his friends and family. She sighed again, though admired how he could push on through such things. She knew that he was practically destroying himself by not properly grieving. She then felt a well of determination pass through her, and her eyes locked onto the orbs in her reflection. I cannot allow him to do that. I will help him, and I will share him if that's what it takes. She stood, and finished dressing. She was now willing to do anything for the blonde. She would finally show him her love, and now accepted that the rules of the world were different. Under such circumstances as this, I'm not surprised that executions are going to be a norm, Naruto thought, as he continued looking towards the bridge. A few protesters were already shot, and the undead were being drawn towards the noise. We shouldn't have too many problems crossing the river fully now. He turned to see Ray come out to the balcony from 3 doors away. He gazed at her, sensing the fire that had ignited in her heart. Maybe it'll be better. At least she is determined now. He sighed as his gaze fell back towards the bridge as he heard more gunshots in the distance. We'll be leaving near dawn. Be prepared, and get some rest, he called out to her. He turned back to enter before pausing. We also have a new person in the group. A young girl. He then entered the apartment again. Ray stared at his retreating form, before noticing the form of a little girl in his room. She appeared to be sleeping, and was under the covers of his bed. Ray suddenly felt her heart warm a little, as she saw him check on the girl. He then stepped over to the small desk in the room, and pulled out a scroll. He started to grab a few items and place them next to it, before sealing them away. She felt entranced watching him write the runes. It was fluid, the strokes seeming to be in a dance of their own. The speed of it was faster than her father would write when practicing such calligraphy. He always seems to make his work appear a dance. Everything he does is like watching a dance. She sighed as he finally finished. She caught his glance for a moment, before deciding to get some rest. She turned back to head to her room, and blushed as she thought of his skills. All the others would agree, he could turn a fight into a dance like a master. Naruto felt drawn to Alice for some reason. He couldn't explain why. Maybe it was because of the apocalypse. Maybe it was because she had just lost her father. Or maybe, feeling a warmth in his chest, it was because he wanted to be a father himself. More than anything, he felt like she was now his responsibility. He felt like he had to take her in and raise her. By her appearance, she seemed to be 7 or 8 years old. He was struck with nostalgia for a moment. Remembering Sakura, Yugao, and Yuna, he wondered if Alice would have been like one of his own children. His eyes glazed over as he saw an apparition of each of his loves. He saw Sakura, reading to Alice. He then saw Yugao tucking in the girl, before turning to him. He then saw the most heart-wrenching. He saw Yuna laying next to the girl, and was humming while embracing the child. He felt a familiar, yet still unwelcome sting in his eyes. He pulled his goggles off, and wiped a few tears away. His hands clenched as he felt a sob trying to break free. He turned back towards the balcony, and saw the crescent moon. It seemed to be waning. Like the moon itself had lost its smile. He stepped out, closing the sliding glass door behind him, and finally allowed the tears to shed. It was silent. He strangled the sob to stay in. He couldn't sense much at the moment, though he could hear the damnable groans. He also heard the light footsteps of Siko as she approached. She gently embraced him after seeing his tears, and his eyes once more. They seemed to be a mix of silver, purple, and red. A storm was sweeping across those eyes. She could feel the war waging in his heart and mind. She then gently grabbed his face, and stared into his eyes. "Don't worry, Naruto-kun. I am here," she said in a whisper. She then brought his face closer to hers, and kissed him chastely. Kota fiddled with the parts of his guns. One thing he always made sure to do, was checking to see if they were in working condition. "These are they all like this?" he wondered, knowing that the ones he had checked were of the best quality one could find. He finished checking the .45, and grinned. "Naruto, my friend, you have some really good firearms." He turned as he heard said man chuckle, and widened his eyes at Naruto's new look. "You will find that all of my weapons are top-grade, Kota. I even have a few assassins pining to buy from me. All of them first class." Kota gasped as he recognized the new garb. "You're the warlock?" The blonde nodded to the bespectacled marksman. Kota had read about the fabled warlock on the internet once. A demon to many of the American soldiers who were stationed in Japan, but considered a warlord, or a god to others. He remembered first hearing of the military's strangest new player. Said to have been the most powerful commander to have appeared in history. The skills of the warlock were vague at best. A complete enigma. Hailed by many of the UN leaders as the best. Many rumors were floating around about the myth of a man so good an assassin and soldier, that he could walk through a wall of gunfire, and not be scratched. No one had ever gotten a clear look at the warlock, besides the world leaders. Kota could see Naruto being the mythical figure, his aura would be enough to say so. The blonde chuckled again, and turned to the balcony he had entered from. "We'll be leaving just after dawn. I'm also letting you know that we have another survivor. Her name is Alice, and she is quite young. I couldn't leave her out there." The blonde then disappeared in a poof of smoke. startling the gun otaku. This would also happen to the others, except for Saya. Saya watched as Naruto walked into her room. His goggles were over his eyes, and he looked like he was a little sad. Her eyes softened as she gazed at him, watching him take his damned goggles off before speaking. She gasped at the sight of his eyes. They were hauntingly beautiful, and she was drawn even more to their gaze. Saya-chan. I apologize for not spending time with you, or the others. I wanted to let you know that we will be leaving after dawn. So you may want to get some rest now. She nodded, though could barely process what he said. She felt like she was entranced by him. His eyes seemed to pierce her soul. She felt like she was staring into the eyes of a god, and found herself more and more willing to give him her body. We also have picked up another survivor. Here she was able to shake the haze from her mind. She is a little girl. Her name is Alice, and she is an orphan as of tonight. Saya nodded slowly, but then breathed out a little, catching Naruto's attention. Naruto-kun, there is something I want to talk to you about. He noticed a pause at the end. What is it, Saya-chan? For a minute she did nothing, but then lunged and enveloped him in a hug. Ai Shitaru! She whispered. He lightly gasped, hearing this, and after a few seconds he returned her hug. Hearing her breath hitch, like she was about to cry. After a few minutes he turned to speak. Saya-chan He was cut off as her lips brushed against his and stayed there for a chaste, yet meaningful kiss. He froze for only a moment, before returning the affectionate gesture. After a few more moments she pulled back. Her eyes were glazed slightly, but still held coherence. Naruto-kun. May I stay with you tonight? His eyes widened, and he would have turned her away, if he knew that she only wanted to have sex. He could see that she didn't, at least not right now. She only seemed to want to be close to him. His heart felt warm, and he nodded. Hi, Saya-chan. You may, I will not turn you away. She then buried her face into his chest, and sighed. Arigato, Naruto-kun. He then held her tighter, as a sense of vertigo washed over her. She opened her eyes to see that they were in a different room. Let me notify the others about tomorrow first, then we may go to bed. He turned, and brought his hands up in a very familiar sign to himself. Suddenly, as she was taking her shirt off, she heard a popping sound. Looking at what made the noise, her eyes widened again. There were 5 other Narutos in front of her. They nodded to their creator and disappeared. He turned, and saw her state of near toplessness, and her wide eyes. He knew that she liked to sleep in the buff, and sighed. I hope I can control myself. Since this wasn't his room, he would have to contend with the fact that his sweatpants were not in there. Meaning he would have to sleep in either his boxers, or nude. Saya then reorganized her thoughts to ask him. What the hell? He chuckled nervously, and started to take his outfit off. I am a shinobi, Saya-chan, was all that he said, before noticing her now completely nude state. She was blushing, but not hiding herself. And so he was given a very nice and arousing view. He then noticed something. So you are a natural rose. He then blushed and turned away. She blushed even more, before stepping up to him, and embracing him from behind. Onagai, don't turn from me. Naruto-koi. He gasped at the suffix, and slowly turned to her. Saya-chan. She then kissed him again. Nothing else was said. He decided to be fair, and sleep nude. Though he made sure that nothing would happen. He allowed her to lay her head on his chest, as they got beneath the covers. Slowly they fell asleep, though Naruto thought one last thing. I love you too, Saya-chan. But can I get away with not having to choose between any of you? Sleep then embraced him. And yeah, no lems yet. Dream sequence, Naruto. I found myself in a place that nearly stilled my heart. A place I never wanted to see again. All around me were corpses, though they moved as if they were still alive. I looked to my left and saw a sign. The sign of the stand where I would eat at as a child. Back then, it was the only place that would let me eat there really. They never overcharged me either. The Ichirakus were standing behind the counter, and seemed to be happy. Though they too were mangled and broken. Half of Tuchi's face was missing, while Ayam seemed to float as she was missing her lower extremities. There were 3 people sitting at the stand. 3 that I recognized. They were the only ones in sight who weren't portrayed as moving corpses. Their skin was unblemished, and showed color that I remember them having. At least when they walked amongst the living. Their forms seemed sad, however, and I felt my heart completely stop and nearly explode at the sight of them. Sakura-chan, Yugaheim, and Yunaheim. I then felt that familiar stinging in my eyes, and tried to approach them. My body, however, was feeling weighted. I moved slowly, as though I were mired in tar. It seemed to take an eternity to reach them. My voice was hoarse, as though I hadn't had any water in days. But I still called out to them. They didn't seem to hear me, though. I tried many times to get their attention, though it seemed as though I were completely ethereal. Like I was a ghost that couldn't interact with anything. After a while I heard Sakura-chan speak. "Do you think that Naruto-kun will truly open his heart again?" she asked the other 2. They seemed to shrug, though Yunaheim spoke after a moment. "If he hasn't changed completely, then I do." Her voice still sounding light and kind, as though it were a song from the heavens. Sakura-chan hummed, the sound nearly breaking me, due to the doubt that seemed to lace it. I really shouldn't have been surprised. Yuna had been the only one who never tried to change me, both subtly or overtly. She accepted me and my pain. It is why I loved her the most. Yuna huffed at the other 2. "You 2 may have loved him, but you never should have tried to mold him." She turned to the pink-haired girl. "You tried to continuously force him to do things. You had control issues." She then turned to Yugaheim. "And you may have tried to get him to be happy and soothed. But the way you did." She then turned away, her eyes going somewhere in the distance. "You made it too fast." Yugaheim slumped her shoulders, her head going down to look at her lap. Sakura then turned to the orange-haired woman. "What about you? You weren't strong enough to resist that infernal possession." Her voice then went cold. "You couldn't even break it to say you were sorry." Yuna flinched at the woman's words. All 3 of them then seemed to fall into depression. I tried to call out again. To say that I was sorry, and that they shouldn't blame themselves. Or each other. To instead blame me, since I couldn't save them. It was here that the wounds appeared. Sakura-chan had a pierced heart, a long blade appearing through her chest with the tip pointing ahead of her. Yugaheim had a hole in her abdomen. Her womb's area completely gone, with charred skin almost everywhere around it. Yunaheim had cut marks, and a wind-enhanced blade mark piercing her chest, along with a slit throat. I choked, and my tears finally fell. I cried, and my voice screamed out to them, begging them to turn and see me. It was all for naught, as they seemed to slowly disintegrate. When they finally disappeared, I fell to my knees. Cold, and my heart shattered beyond all hope of repair. I then heard a voice. One that I had heard before. "Do not worry, Naruto-kun. We are here." I turned to look at the sound, and found 7 women standing there. Siko in an elaborate kimono that matched her hair, and carrying a katana in her sash. Saya in a dress that was befitting a young princess from the West, her eyes shining behind her glasses. Rei in her new gear, and carrying a rifle fitted with a bayonet. Then Shizuka wearing a sweater and long skirt. Rika was wearing her new standard outfit, a mix of sweat and umbu gear. She also held a gun that I was familiar with, one that I had made for her. Then came Kyoko, the red-haired teacher whose glasses glimmered with her eyes. And the last was Yuki, still wearing her school uniform, though she had a .38 holstered on her right leg. They all smiled at me, and for a moment, I thought that heaven had finally taken me. I then felt my mouth move, and words that I hoped to never say to them came from it. I will destroy you." I then, to something else's control, leapt and proceeded to slaughter them. I tried to wrest control before I could strike down Siko, but something fought back. And it paralyzed my will. I was forced to watch the life leave them with my eyes catching theirs as they struggled to fight the hands of death off. The last to fall was Saya. I finally regained control and rushed to her, holding her as she bled out from my sword, piercing her womb, and then her chest. "Saya! Please don't die! I'm sorry!" I said sorry over and over. She stopped me though, and said 3 words. 3 words that broke me, even though they were just words. "I love you." She then passed, and I felt a void in my chest. I screamed and raged to the heavens. It was then that I felt the darkness take me. Though I heard a dark laugh, and a demonic voice holler at me. "You will never have a light! You will never love again!" 430 Rika's apartment, guest room. One of many. Naruto's eyes shot open. His breath hitching, and coming out in light gasps. He had chilled sweat on his brow, and for a moment he forgot where he was. He forced his eyes around the room, looking for anything that was a threat, and to find an anchor to reality. He then felt the weight on his chest. Looking down slightly, his memories came back. He sighed in relief as he saw the face of Saya, lightly laying there, and if her eyes would have been open, she would have been looking directly into his. Bringing himself back into control took a few minutes, but he finally regained control of his breathing. He stayed there, gazing at her beauty. "Just a dream," he whispered. Then he remembered where they were, and what was happening in the world outside. He created a kage bunshin, and kawara meat asterisk with it. Getting dressed, he walked to the kitchen 1 floor below. He took notice that it was empty and quiet. Not even turning on the light, he went straight to the sink. Running the cold tap for a few seconds, he cupped his hands and threw water on his face. He then heard the click of the light switch and shut the water off. Turning to see who was awake, he saw Rika. He heard her gasp and saw her slowly approach him. "Naruto-kun, are you all right?" He watched her as she slowly embraced him. He slowly, ever so slowly, returned the embrace. "Your eyes are red." He widened said orbs, shuddering slightly. For a few minutes he said nothing, but finally spoke after what seemed as forever. I had a dream," he said, his voice almost sounding broken. Rika hummed in a reassuring way. He seemed to have frozen. "Tell me about it, will you?" she asked after a few minutes had passed. He breathed out heavily in a sigh, and let her go. Moving to the marble-top island, and sitting on a bar stool, he sighed again. She took this as a sign that he would need a beer or two, and went to the fridge. Grabbing 2 bottles of imported Budweiser, she closed the cooler's door, and sat one down in front of him. After a moment, he opened the bottle, and took a mouthful. He then started to tell her of what he saw. His eyes really were cursed, he decided. Forcing him to remember everything he saw was not the best thing for someone who was a trained killer and soldier. He felt her rub his shoulder in a soothing way. He knew that she was the only one out of his team that he would open up to. He seemed to be drawn more to the female gender. Though in truth, most men in his life either neglected or betrayed him. He hated having trust issues, but couldn't seem to let them go. He had never really opened up to even the Emperor, who he considered a grandfather. Even more than Hiruzen Sarutobi. After a while, and a few beers, he felt a little better. He shed only a few tears, and felt Rika hold him from behind, her head lightly laying on his shoulder. He knew about her feelings, but suddenly found fear in acceptance. He never wanted his dark side to manifest and attack her, or any of the others. Not like it did in Project 1. Saya awoke to an empty bed, the clone having dispelled as soon as she began to stir. She felt peaceful when she remembered what had happened last night. She got up after finding her glasses, and walked to the body mirror in the room. Her F-cup freeze swayed as she walked over to grab a brush. Though she looked down to the small amount of hair just above her vagina. "Did he like how I look?" she pondered, as she brushed her hair. Having let it down last night, she also wondered if he would prefer it like this. She then grasped her left wrist, and felt the firmness of her fipples. She stopped brushing her hair, and let her hand glide down to her stomach, and then the small patch of pubic hair. She was extremely tempted to just play with herself. She had never done so before, and was suddenly feeling the urge to relieve herself of the building frustration. She sat the brush down, and moved back to the bed. She then rubbed the lips of her vagina, and started to masturbate, while laying back down. She knew what she wanted, and she knew that she wanted him to take her virginity. She found herself wanting to carry his child, and this seemed to make her even hotter than before. She began to pant and whimper. For 30 minutes she did so, all the while imagining that Naruto was inside her. Naruto stood on the roof of the apartment complex. Dawn was approaching, and he watched as Jack and Hanzo loaded the last of the things they would need. They would finally cross the river fully. He watched as the girls and Koda helped Alice into the reckoning. He also noticed that the undead were swarming the streets again. No rest from these things, I suppose. Maybe going to Takagi Manor won't be such a good idea. If these things follow us. He sighed as Rika called up to him, saying that everyone was ready. Siko and Saya had changed their outfits, as did Shizuka Star. He then leapt off the roof and headed to his truck. No going back now. This is the end of the peace I was enjoying not even 2 days ago. He then jumped up to enter the reckoning. Hanzo looked out the windshield of the reckoning, seeing a lot of the undead converging on the street. Seems like something is riling them up, boss? He turned to look at Naruto. The blonde hummed in agreement. His goggled gaze looking straight forward, though he glanced back at the driver. Rika was sitting at the table in the middle of the command center. Let's get out of here, the blonde said. Set a course through the back streets. Line up as close as possible to Takagi's gate. Head across the river and push it. I want to be there by sundown. Hanzo nodded and shifted gears, getting ready to speed through the streets. So, are we going to knock? Hanzo mock asked. Naruto chuckled and adjusted his goggles for more comfort. What do you think? Rika then asked. Boss, how long do you think we will be out here? Shouldn't we push to the dash? Naruto cut her off. We won't be here longer than a week or 2. We'll make it to HQ ASAP. Rika nodded and went back to the map she was looking at. Naruto then turned to head to the armory. I'll get the others fitted, keep on course. Don't let anything slow us down, he said before exiting. The silence he left in there felt ominous. I hope you girls can get through to him, Hanzo said, as he pushed more on the gas pedal. I hope so too, Rika replied. They could sense his struggle. Kyoko sat next to Yuki. Both had a look of thought on their faces. They had seen the interaction between Naruto and Rika, though hadn't heard the words spoken. Yuki-chan, do you think we really should make ourselves his girls? It looked like Rika is the only one to get him to open up, Kyoko asked her favorite student. The orange-haired young lady sighed. I don't know, but I want to be there for him. I see him, and I feel like I could give him anything, and he would lay the world before us if we asked. Kyoko nodded to Yuki's words. I feel the same, but I still feel like it will be an uphill battle. Yuki nodded, and both looked up as Saya entered the room with Rei and Siko. Saya looked slightly down, though it wasn't easy to see her slightly depressed mood. What happened to her? They both thought. They then looked around for Shizuka, but couldn't find her. Shizuka-sensei is watching Alice, Rei said, gaining the attention of the two once more. They noticed Siko putting her hand on Saya's shoulder. What's wrong? Kyoko asked, wanting to make sure that the rose-haired teen was all right. Saya sighed, but decided to respond. I told Naruto-kun how I felt last night, but I don't know what he thinks or feels. She paused for a second. I got him to respond somewhat, but I never heard him reply. I only got him to let me sleep near him. Kyoko cast her eyes down, before standing up and going to hug the somewhat distraught girl. We should probably see what we can do to help. Has anyone seen Koda? Siko asked politely. Yuki looked up to the ceiling for a moment before responding. I think he went up on that nest. Probably watching out for anything. He always was a bit reclusive though, she said, to which Rei nodded. They then heard Shizuka speaking from the hallway. And this is where we all stay. At least I think this is it, the buxom blonde said to Alice as they entered the room. Yep. This is it. Damn. I forgot how big I made the armory. Naruto sighed as he browsed through weapons and switched out seals to look through others. Why the fuck did I make this again? He asked the heir, not expecting an answer. Because we both know you will need them, Naruto-kun. Came a voice that Naruto recognized. He sighed before turning to see the one woman he regretted yelling at. Kami-sama. The golden-haired deity smiled sadly at the young immortal. It's been a little while, hasn't it? Naruto nodded, before turning back to the rifle section. Grabbing one with a bayonet, he checked the weight and firing mech. A few months, if I remember right. He continued perusing the armory for weapons the others could use, before stopping in the subs section. I must apologize, Kami-sama. I treated you unfairly in our last meeting. The goddess still smiled sadly at him, but moved closer. Naruto-kun, there is nothing you need to apologize for. I slighted you. By making you my champion, I destroyed your life. Naruto shook his head, and turned to face her. You have taken my ability to die. You haven't destroyed my life yet. He then turned back to the weapons. So what brings you here, Kami-sama? He asked as he pulled an MP off the rack, checking it before putting it back. Kami sighed, as she watched him continue as if on autopilot. She gazed at him with tears beginning to swell in her eyes. You shouldn't close yourself off to them, Naruto-kun. Your nightmares won't come to pass. You absolved the hatred of Kurama, remember? She watched him stop for a long moment. It isn't that which concerns me. My own darkness is cause for my hesitance. You know how hard I have to fight myself. He then turned to her, taking his goggles off. These eyes are almost as bad as the Uchiha clan's. She nodded to his words. But you have the heart, and the drive to stop it. You know that you are the master, she said as she turned to leave. Just remember what drives you. That will be enough to destroy your personal demons. She then disappeared in a flash of light. Naruto stood there for a while, staring at the same spot. He then sighed. That is what they all told me. My darkness fell silent once before. But I never destroyed it. He turned back to the weapons racks and proceeded to search for suitable ones for the group. Why did you pull me back? I was this close to killing him. Kagero yelled at the woman before him. All I had to do was get a little closer, and I would have dashed. He was cut off as a shock went through his system. You fool! The woman said in a low tone. He could have destroyed you. You think that your one bullet could have really hurt him? He is a regenerator. She turned back to look at the recordings from Kagero's eyes. I should have known better than to think he was as slow as an average person. I had read a few of the reports. But I couldn't even grasp this speed. She had run calculations of the battle. He seems to be as fast as sound. Reaching you so quickly, and still appearing to be holding back. She gritted her teeth. Her brunette locks covering her glasses in shadow. I will have my revenge, Kagero. My father will rest in peace once his soul leaves this mortal coil. Kagero stood back up, recognizing her state of mind. Mira, he whispered before sighing sadly. Kota sighed, as he put his binoculars back into a pouch on his hip. There are far more of them now, yesterday was only the beginning. He then opened the hatch to go back inside. As he descended the ladder, he felt a small chill run up his spine. I hope that humanity can survive this. He then put his feet on the floor of the hallway, and turned to head towards the armory. Maybe I can help with keeping the guns working. With that thought, he walked towards the first floor. He stopped for a moment outside of the room where all of the girls were, hearing them talking in normal tones, but decided not to pry. He started walking again, not even knowing that his best friend and rescuer was already in the armory. Dead bite or undead? Jack asked, as he browsed through his MP3 player. He then looked out the window of reckoning. Nah, I'll go with I Will Not Bow by Breaking Benjamin. Sound good, Hans? The driver turned his eyes to the gunner for a moment. I don't know why you listen to that American music. But sure, why not? The gunner shrugged and pressed play. It's good music, he replied. Rika sighed as the song played. It's like it was written for Naruto-kun. He won't bow, and you can't break what already is, she whispered. I hope his heart can be mended. If I have to, I'll share him. If that will make him happy, she finished, standing up and gazing towards the command bridge's exit. And this is the smaller vehicle. I still haven't seen the inside of Eden. She then stepped out, as the two men listened to music. She stepped out as Koga came down the stairs. Nodding to the young gun enthusiasts, they both walked to the armory. As they approached the door, after a few minutes of walking, they heard two people talking inside it. Your nightmares won't come to pass. You absolved the hatred of Kurama, remember? The two paused, not recognizing the voice of a female. There was a long pause, before the voice of Naruto spoke. He sounded cold yet subdued. It isn't that which concerns me. My own darkness is cause for my hesitance. You know how hard I have to fight myself. They looked to each other, before hearing the end of the conversation. These eyes are almost as bad as the Uchiha clans. A slight pause again, before the woman they didn't know spoke again. But you have the heart, and the drive to stop it. You know that you are the master. Just remember what drives you. That will be enough to destroy your personal demons. A strange light appeared beneath the doorway. A little time passed before they heard Naruto mumble. Rika then approached the door before pausing. Naruto spoke clearly, his voice sounding as it usually did. You two may enter now. Rika hesitated for only a moment, then opened the door. Naruto-kun? She asked as she saw him grabbing a bayonet semi-auto rifle. This should do, he said before placing it on the table. He then turned to the handgun section. I know you heard that conversation. You need not be concerned about it. It is something only I can deal with. He grabbed a .38 and checked it over, before nodding and placing it on the table as well. I don't know if Kyoko and Shizuka know how to use weapons. He then turned to the violet-haired sniper. Rika-chan, does Shizuka-chan know how to use a firearm? He asked in curiosity. She thought for a moment, before nodding slowly. I was able to teach her how to use sidearms. A Glock .9mm if I remember right. We were teens at the time, she answered. Well, we're in luck, I have a few in here. See if you can find suitable weapons for the others, I have to get Siko something, he said as he walked away from the two. Hi. Naruto-kun? She asked just as he put his right foot out the door. He paused, and looked back. I'll be fine, Rika-chan, he said before continuing his walk. The door closed behind him. Do you need help, Rika-san? Koda asked. Siko left the barracks, and walked to Naruto's office. She noticed that the door was open, and stepped inside. The room was empty, but she noticed a folder on the desk. Curiosity, getting the better of her, she opened it. Project 1. She read, though couldn't read more as the lettering was in German. She cursed herself for not having taken more language classes. She closed the folder, before something caught her eye. Turning to the right, she saw a katana, sheathed in a dark purple scabbard. The blade was a standard length, with white wrappings around the handle. The tsuba and pommel were a dark silver color, with the tsuba depicting the phases of the moon. Her eyes glazed over, as she slowly reached her hands to grasp the sword. The moment her right hand touched the handle, she felt a light chill run through her. This is a solid blade. This was made by a master smith. She lifted the katana from the stand it was placed on. It's like it's... She then heard Naruto's voice. She calls to you. Turning with a small start, she was about to apologize. He stopped her before she could utter a single syllable. That blade is known as Taketsu Yaiba no Tsuki, or Frozen Blade of the Moon. That blade was a gift from Yuna. He looked away for a brief moment. She calls for you, Siko-chan. Wield her well. He then walked to sit at his desk. Siko stared at the blonde with wide eyes. Naruto-kun, I can't accept this, she protested, but was stopped from saying more. That blade is abused. I can't use it properly, my own katana the Kage Yaiba is what I am tuned to. That sword calls for you. You are a sword wielder, you know that blades possess their own will. He then looked her in the eye, taking his goggles off. The sword chooses the wielder, not the other way around. She nodded, and smiled at him before bowing. Dano arigatou gozaimasu, Naruto-kun. She then shot forward, wrapping him in an embrace and kissing him. It wasn't longer than a few seconds, no lust was behind it. It was short, and filled with gratitude. But there was also that warm feeling coming from her, one that he wanted more than anything, but was too scared to admit needing it. That emotion he felt from, and for her, was love. He almost let a tear escape. As she pulled back, he gazed into her eyes, and noticed her entrancement by his own. He chuckled quietly. Yuna had the same look in her eyes. He then stood and said one last thing before leaving, having finished placing the folder in his desk. You have beautiful eyes too, Sikoheim. I've been letting them see more of the real me. The side I have kept hidden for a while now. I should open up to them more, but I am frightened of what will happen if I lose to my own darkness. I know I told Kami-sama that these eyes were almost as bad as the Sharingan. Naruto sighed. The reckoning approaching the river once more. The Rinnegan can be worse. He finished his thought, as well as his cigarette, throwing the butt over the side from the nest. No wonder Nagata lost it. The young commander tried to not let anything get to him. He had tried being an overly joyful person, and a cold weapon. But he knew that he wouldn't be able to keep everything in for long. Grabbing another smoke from his seemingly endless cigarette carrier, he lit it whilst pondering his predicament with all of the females in his group. I want to let them in. I want to be loved again. To actually be a father. But how can I choose any of them, when I have to fight myself more than the undead? He took a long drag before continuing. For that matter, how could I choose one, and not hurt the others? I've never had to deal with this situation before. Hinata moved on after Nagato attacked. He sighed again. Then noticed Reckoning's proximity to the river, bracing himself as they hit a bump before the water. He then returned to his thoughts, while keeping an eye out for anything. This is so confusing. If only Kurama were here. He then stiffened slightly. Scratch that. The damn fur ball would just scream at me to either pick one, or bag them all. Before screaming to shut the fuck up and let him sleep. Although he did get a slight nosebleed from the thought of all of the women. Damn it. He then turned as he heard a chuckle. You know, I think the boss man might be having some pervy thoughts, Jack stated. Naruto just glared at the gunner for a moment before sighing. You normally know I'm here before I can get close. What I say mad at you? Naruto glanced back before returning to his smoke. Just thinking, Jack. Being confused, and hoping to see some things to make dead again soon. The glazed man nodded. Yep. Getting bored too. Naruto nodded, then turned to head back in. Keep watch, but don't steal all the fun when you see more of those poor bastards. The gunner saluted as he left, and replied. Aye, sir. Continuing through the hallway, heading towards his office, Naruto's thoughts shifted. It seems that the doctor is trying to kill me again. I'll need to be ready for anything she will throw at me. He paused, looking towards the wall. Why does nanotechnology resemble the feeling of chakra? And how did she make advancements with such tech? He sighed as he stepped into his office. I'll need to look into this at a later date. Sitting at his desk once more, Naruto turned his laptop on. Pulling open a file that read ED&E, he then started glancing over plans for what appeared to be a ship. He continued for around 10 minutes before Jack appeared. Boss, you might want to see this. Standing, Naruto followed the gunner back to the nest. You've got to be fucking with me. Seriously? Naruto asked, as he gazed at the empty streets that were approaching. Jack shook his head. I asked the same thing. He spoke in a serious tone. I looked up and down the bank. Not one zombie. Naruto's grip on the railing strained the metal. Takagi must be keeping a good eye out. Sanosuke, make sure we aren't blindsided. Naruto then turned to leave. Jack nodded, though flinched at the use of his real name. I hope my little Mira is doing okay. Even if she thinks I'm dead. The begaussed man thought. Naruto stopped outside of the barracks. I should have thought of a better name for the damn betting room. He opened the door, seeing all but Kota and Rika inside. Look alive! We are getting close to the Takagi estate. So far the streets appear empty. He announced, stepping in, his voice hard, like he was issuing orders to a group of soldiers. However, I expect to see those creatures in a short time. I smell an ambush, so I want all of you to head to the armory and load up. Grab what you find suitable to use, and grab some pouches for ammo. He paused to look at each of the ladies. We don't have time for proper instruction on how to use the firearms you choose. You will be getting first-hand experience in live combat. If you really need help, ask Rika or Kota. Remember to keep the safety off, the gun loaded, and aim for the head. He turned to Shizuka. You are our medic, grab a Glock and keep an eye on Alice. He then turned to Siko. I know you don't prefer guns, but I suggest you get a sidearm. He then glanced at the others. I will be in command until we reach the manor. So if I give an order, you all will follow it. No questions. Am I clear? He raised his voice at the end. All of them straightened at his low shout, unconsciously submitting to his authority. Hi! They all responded, recognizing the seriousness in his tone. Good. Now load up. I expect heavy combat soon. He then turned and left. Alice blinked, not understanding why Naruto appeared to be angry. Nissan is scary, she said, hugging Shizuka's leg. The Boston nurse turned to the girl and nodded. Saya headed to the door. He's doing that to make sure we get through this alive. But I agree, he seemed colder than my Tucson just now. We better go grab some guns. She then stepped out, followed by Ray. The sound of Reckoning's engine was deafening, the silence of the streets was ominous. If one listened, and ignored the sound of the vehicle, one would say they could hear Death himself. Little was said, as the girls grabbed some weapons. Ray grabbed an M1A1 Super Match. She instantly picked it for the fact that it had a spear-like bayonet attached. Siko, after looking for a few seconds, settled on an M92 customized Vertec asterisk. She frowned while holding the light handgun. Having never even considered using a firearm before, she didn't know how they really worked, but took it anyway. Saya grabbed a customized Luger P08 asterisk, with an extended barrel and larger magazine size. It reminded her of her mother's that was on display in the estate. She then grabbed an MP5 SFK. Yuki picked up a custom Colt Delta Elite 10mm auto pistol asterisk, and a Benelli M4 Super 90. Kyoko grabbed a Colt .357 Python asterisk, and a Model 94.30-30 rifle star. Shizuka was helped by Rika, getting a slightly modified Glock .9mm. All of them grabbed holsters/straps, and hip pouches to carry ammo in. All of the guns had 3 kanji emblazoned into the barrels. Lightning, magnetism, and defense, asterisk all arranged in a circle. After Rika and Kota checked the guns, they walked to the nest. Rika turning into the spare vehicle room. We may need to evacuate, so I'll have transport prepped. She saluted the group as they continued. This can't be good, Jack said as he gazed down at the wires of the barricade, then at the zombies that were starting to surround them. Taking his M16 and turning it to semi-auto. They aren't really smart, are they, boss? He asked as Naruto appeared behind him. Save ammo while you can. If Soichiro hasn't noticed us, we may have to go on foot. Or use the smaller vehicles, Naruto ordered. His visage was tense, muscles coiled and ready. This is what the girls arrived to see. Dozens of the undead, and the 2 men primed for combat. More of the creatures flocking to the reckoning. Naruto unsheathed his katana and sprung from the nest, his leap carrying him over the heads of many of the once humans. His katana was covered in lightning as he landed on one and took its head. The sound of many birds chirping drew the nearest of them. With that, the battle began. Jack took one shot, caving in the skull of a zombie, and taking half the chest of another. Kota jumped the rail, heading to a side balcony that opened just off the roof. Siko and Ray followed Naruto's example, leaping off of the reckoning. The others decided to not do much, only Shizuka and Saya having experience with their sidearms. Saya, having received training from her mother, shot one as it approached beneath Kota's line of fire, joining him in providing support to the melee fighters. Siko's blade flashed out, tasting the flesh of 3 zombies, cutting their upper torso enough to separate their spines. The blade seemed to cast off a hazy and cold mist. She noticed a slight freezing-like effect from the blade, as no blood flew more than an inch before freezing into near-perfect crystals of red drops. You are a special blade, aren't you? She thought as she stepped around another of the undead, bifurcating it vertically. The blade also seemed to stay as clean as when she first drew it. Ray attacked any and all of them that got close to her, fighting as though she were possessed. The bayonet of her rifle ripping through throats, and throwing those she pierced away from her form. She turned as one tried to grab her from behind, hitting it in the face with the stock of her weapon, before cleaving its head with a swipe when she finished turning. Damn it! Return to your graves! She shouted, moving even faster than before. Kakashi, would you have become one of these? Were it not for your cremation? Kota took careful aim, as he shot another creature that was getting too close to Siko's back. He was using a DMR that he grabbed before the battle. His other weapons were held in holsters, and the rifles were slung across his back. He smirked as he put another hole in a different zombie. This is a nice gun. A designated marksman rifle, huh? He grinned at how smooth the firearm operated. Naruto breathed out, as he felled another of the undead. The fight had been going for around 20 minutes by now. Noticing Siko behind him, he made a decision. Pulling a radio comm out, he spoke. Hanzo, get to the Takagi estate and tell Lord Takagi that I and one other will arrive in the morning. Lady Yuriko is approaching. Get Death's Reckoning there and lock it down. You are to represent me until I arrive. Get the others to safety, he said as he sensed a group of people heading towards them on the other side of the barricade. He turned off the radio and charged chakra into his vocal cords. He then hollered at the zombies. Over here, you freaks! I'm a to-go buffet! He then turned and ran while still yelling obscenities at the undead, moving at a civilian's pace. Siko followed him. Ray made to as well, but was stopped by Kota. The group watched as Naruto and Siko ran through the mass of walking flesh-eaters, disappearing for a moment, seeing them reappear heading up some stairs. The creatures followed the noise of the blonde, and leaving the group alone. Naruto-kun, the girls thought, hoping he would be alright. Forgetting through their worry that he could wipe out more than this amount of enemies. It was then that Saya heard a voice calling to them from the other side of the barricade. Huh? She asked as she turned to see a group of people moving to them. The one who called removed their helmet, revealing Lady Takagi Yuriko. Ka-san! Saya yelled, and ran to the fence. Open it, and let them through! The older Takagi called to her followers. Saya then turned back to where she could just barely make out Naruto. Naruto Kyuen! Head to my house as soon as you can! She screamed, not knowing if he heard or not. She then approached her mother, giving the woman a hug. Naruto stopped to cleave another zombie in two. Well, they made it. He then turned to Siko, and watched as the swordswoman sliced another head off. You heard her, right? He asked when she turned to him. She nodded before both turned to see even more of the creatures shuffling towards them. Wanna compete, Siko-chan? He asked. Run towards the nearby shrine. Whoever has the more kills wins. Siko smirked, feeling her bloodlust start to take over. Sure, she replied before rushing towards the mass of zombies. Naruto laughed, before following. He kept himself at her level, just to be fair. Though he used his own style. Both moving as though they were dancing, twirling and slicing, cleaving and impaling, leaving in their wake a river of blood and gore. Appearing as agents of the Shinigami, reaping retribution to the soulless abominations that plagued the world. If one could record it, it would be the epitome of death. All appearing as a dance of blades and blood. Siko noticed that Naruto's walls were slowly eroding, as he seemed to enjoy this dance of death. Fear blades flashed around them, and more blood spilled in the last 10 minutes than she had ever seen before. She wondered Bravefly if this is what he lived in during his war. She slowed a little and watched as he spun in a twirling flip. When he landed, all she saw after a second was a red mist where the creatures once stood. Her eyes widened slightly, even as she struck another one of them. After 20 minutes, they had reached a fountain in the middle of a crosspath in a park. She nearly froze as she saw the amount of zombies, though she continued on as Naruto leapt into the mass of undead. They continued, flashes appearing as Naruto cleaved into them, rending more of the things inert. She turned with a bloodthirsty grin, but froze as she saw children. No. Not kids. Her breath hitched as she saw one approaching her, its intestines hanging out, and most of its face torn. She could see the right side of its skull with pieces of flesh hanging off, and the eye missing. She stumbled back, having felt terror, and nearly fell into the clutches of another. But before the once child could grab her, she found herself in the arms of Naruto. She noticed that ground was now below them. He had grabbed her in a bridal carry, and jumped on top of the fountain. Are you alright, Siko-chan? She turned to him, with tears finally falling. She then wrapped her arms around his neck and sobbed. He could see why, as he also felt his stomach lurch. Knowing that even children fell into this hell, being unable to run from the flesh-eaters. He sighed, and made a seerless Kage Bunshin. Nodding, the doppelganger leapt down and breathed in, letting the breath go with a shout. Fire style, majestic flame destroyer, asterisk. From his breath came a roaring inferno that spread with a speed that even a bullet would sweat to match. Siko turned, and watched as the flame engulfed all in front of the clone. Her eyes were wide, and Naruto could smell the fear from her. He held her closer, and turned her head into his chest. He didn't want her to watch as the things were turned to ash. The bottom of his coat was floating from the wind, with embers and pieces of flame falling around them. From his goggles, one could see an otherworldly glow of purple. The flame made it seem as though the sun was next to them, even though it was just about to fall below the horizon. The heat wrapped around them, as the clone finally stopped and dispelled. After a few moments, when the heat died down, he spoke. It's all right now. They are gone. He then moved, jumping down from the fountain, and headed towards the shrine he had seen. Naruto moved with a near spectral-like silence. He kept Siko's head in place, not letting her look around them. He had summoned a few clones after leaving the park, to make sure the way was clear. He could still sense Siko's fear, but it didn't appear to be aimed at him. Those children have shaken her up pretty bad. He sighed as they approached the shrine, watching as his clones took out the undead. I'll have to keep the clones around. I can't let Sikoheim fight right now, he thought, not even realizing that he called her a princess. I should have grabbed the jeep, at least. He almost deadpanned at his thoughtlessness. I'm loosing my touch, he whispered, so lowly that Siko only caught the word loosing. She brought her face closer to his neck, while keeping her eyes clenched shut. She shivered slightly as the darkness grew from the night. Naruto commanded a clone mentally to remove his goggles. The clone did, allowing the eyewear to fall around his neck, before getting back into its station. They weren't moving fast, preferring to stay as silent as possible, and sticking to using katanas. They had been moving for only 20 minutes, being cautious. He sighed again as they passed the archway, having the clones go and take care of the creatures. He slowed to a walk, approaching the door to the place of worship. This will have to do, he said as the last zombie was slain. He chuckled slightly. Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto, commander of the allied shinobi forces. Reduced to a zombie slayer. He chuckled again. How quaint, he said as he opened the door with a small bit of gravity manipulation. His Rinnegan glowing lowly while using the power. He then set Siko down on her feet, helping her move to the old shrine statue. Sikoheim, are you alright? He asked, staring into her still fearful eyes. She nodded slowly, allowing him to guide her to the base of the statue. She sunk to her knees, and he could tell she was at war with herself. If it helps. They weren't children anymore, Haim. Her breath hitched once, before she began to cry quietly. He embraced her, feeling his heart tear slightly at the sight. He knew that she hadn't cried in a long time, and it tore him apart to know that he couldn't do much to ease the pain. He held her closer, allowing her to soak his coat with her tears. Rika glanced at Hanzo as the driver spoke to Lady Takagi. She was worried, but knew that the two missing would be fine. She had never seen Naruto actually let loose his full power. She had only seen him train a few times. No one has ever seen him go all out. She then turned as a massive wall of flame appeared in the nearby park. Hanzo deadpanned for a moment as everyone watched the fire die out. Well, boss is just fine, he said, which made everyone look at him. Jack laughed before turning to walk away from the mansion's entryway. "I'll be in the reckoning," he said, moving away from the group. Though he mumbled slightly. "He's starting to get a little more serious use." Rika watched as the last of the flames disappeared. "I will need to investigate this outbreak. And it's worldwide too." Naruto sighed as he made a clone to unseal a sleeping bag for Siko. He gazed around the shrine's main room, spotting a few scrolls hung around while open. Most likely tales of past priests, or edicts of being a holy one. It'll have to do for now. He then placed the now sleeping swordswoman on the sleeping bag. It was blue, and at least more comfortable than the bare floor. He looked around once more, feeling as though he was being watched. He even looked up towards the ceiling, and only noticed a single camera that appeared to be turned off. He knew it wasn't. He made sure to not gaze at it for too long, seeming to only sweep his gaze past it. What game will be played here, I wonder? It appears that I won't be getting any sleep tonight. Looking at a monitor that was centered on Naruto, from the camera, was Kishikara Kagero. The man smiled, and spoke to the woman next to him. "Look, Mira. He is at the entrance to your hiding place. What would you have me do?" The woman next to him barely spoke, though he heard it. "Kidnap the girl, it might make him more compliant." "Do not fail, Kagero. Surveillance from the park showed him being even more terrible than when he fought you." She then turned her amber gaze to the man, her light hair seeming to turn gray in the dim light. "He was holding back, he always has been. We will have our revenge, Kagero. Even if it kills us." She spoke with finality, her gaze showing nothing but consuming flames in her will. Naruto sat beside the candles he had lit, just beneath the statue. Siko slept just a few feet away from him. He had been sitting still for 30 minutes. The mark of sage mode around his closed eyes. It was hard to enter such a state these days, seeing as how this world didn't have such a great connection to nature. It took longer, and carried darker emotions than his home world did. So much blood has been spilled in this world. So much hatred fills the air. This zombie fiasco only makes it worse. He sighed as he thought this, before opening his eyes. He had sensed the same feeling he had from Kagero, as well as someone who was nearly consumed by revenge. This will be a long night. He made a few more clone to watch over Siko, and one to keep a connection to nature. With as little a connection as he possibly could get. He then stood, and made sure his weapons were secure. "Let us dance, Kagero. Let us dance," he said before seeming to disappear in a blur that not even the advanced camera could track. He had decided to end this. Knowing where the man was coming from, and sensing the intent behind the man's actions. Kagero sighed, as he pulled his gun blade from its holster. "I know I'm not gonna win." He then looked to his left forearm, watching as the new computer read his status, and showed the charge level for his newest attack. He looked back to the shrine, noticing the silhouette of the man he wanted revenge against. No, not a man. He then stepped forth, watching as the shadow of Naruto Namikaze stayed in place, as though it were frozen. Kagero placed a foot into the shrine's courtyard, a bead of sweat trailing down the side of his jaw. Kagero knew that this was it. He knew that only one of them would walk away. A cloud had covered the moon, nearly throwing everything into shadows. He then saw the strange ethereal glow from behind Naruto's goggles. He nearly froze at the sight of it. He gulped, noticing the chill in the air. It wasn't a natural chill, it seemed to come from the blonde warrior in front of him. As though the Shinigami was present, and possessing his opponent. Kagero nearly jumped when the shadow spoke. "Before we begin, Kishikara-san, allow me to ask one question." The voice was cold, and set as a monotone. Kagero shivered slightly, but managed to nod. "For what reason would you be trying to kill me so zealously?" Kagero tensed, trying to find his voice, as the clouds moved away from the moon's light. He then saw something behind the blonde. It was spectral in appearance, and truly frightening. It appeared as a fox with 9 tails, and covered in demonic armor, with wings much like a crow's. From its helmeted gaze was 2 red glowing orbs. The eyes were a deeper red, almost like it was gazing with blood, instead of eyes. The creature seemed to grin, as it put a human-like hand to its waist. It pulled a demonic blade, and snarled at the man. Frozen, Kagero nearly screamed as it pointed at him. A demonic whisper echoing around him. Answer, a worm. He took a step back, his fight or flight instincts screaming to run. He fought that feeling, with trepidation. I told you already. You stole my position. The fox seemed to chuckle, while Naruto frowned. No. That is not true, the blonde said, as the air grew colder. I see. So little Mira thinks that her father is really dead, he said after a few moments of gazing at the ex-Hayabusa agent. Kagero's eyes widened slightly, when the blonde spoke again. Foolish! She received the medical reports. The blonde then grabbed his blade, as 6 more appeared, floating around him. Let us dance now, Kagero-chan. Let me show you the truth, the blonde said, sliding into the stance that he had mastered. Seeming as though he would be using a type of Iato * style. In truth, it was close to the type, but far more advanced. His katana wasn't attached to his hip though, and he had 6 more circling him at a constant pace. Kagero's instincts screamed even louder. He tried to turn, finally listening to them, but found the blonde in front of the gate. He then dodged a slice from one of the floating blades, jumping back, trying to get away. He aimed a shot at Naruto. The resounding echo of the gun's shot rang out. He then froze as the blonde sliced the .44 round into so many paces he couldn't count. It was done with the blonde's main katana. It only looked like one slice. How can he? He should be just a man. He then noticed the blonde dissolving, and he rolled forward as 2 more blades shot towards him at a traceable speed. He sighed. At least my nano can keep up with those. Fast as bullets. He then flinched as he felt a strike to his arm. Looking to his left, he saw Naruto, without goggles. He froze at seeing the purple eyes of the Rinnegan. Orbs that now had pupils appearing as a cross of bars, and glowing a deep purple. He almost screamed, looking into those depths. Appearing both demonic and divine. In that small span of time, he felt another 8 slashes appear on him. The blonde appeared to dance, the purple glow of his eyes creating dim streaks of light while following. His blade flashing faster than even Kagero could track. Though he was able to block a few strikes, Kagero's suit still suffered, as did his flesh. Siko awoke as the sound of a single shot rang out around the shrine. She pushed herself up, when she heard a snarl coming from the door. Looking to the source, she saw a brunette woman trying to get past a wall of purple flames. She also noticed 4 Naruto sitting in a lotus position at the corners of the room. She also heard the telltale sounds of a sword slicing through the air. She couldn't really see past the doorway very well, though she did see a flash. Like someone swung a sword at a fast speed in the moonlight. Damn it! The woman cursed, finally seeing that Siko was awake. The woman scoffed before turning to the sounds. Siko grabbed her blade, before slowly standing. What the hell is going on? Who is this woman? She then saw the woman stiffen slightly before running out, and shouting. Kagero! Siko followed the woman, stopping in front of the wall of flames. She then saw Naruto, with a disarmed man standing in front of him. The man was wounded, though the cuts were superficial, not even really constituting a true concern about it. What really set the 2 ladies off was Kagero's glazed eyes. He appeared to be staring at something behind the blonde. Something they could not see. Suddenly Naruto moved, appearing to defy the natural order by moving so fast that after images appeared. Naruto heard the woman's shout, recognizing her as Mira. He then saw Siko watching them. So I must end this now, Kagero. My apologies. But if you wish to find the truth, then go to the surrounding forest. 20 miles south of Tokunosu, then 5 miles west. The blonde sighed, before moving. He spoke one last time before finally disappearing. In 5 days. Naruto then moved. To everyone else he just flashed away, leaving behind an after image. To him, time seemed to slow to a crawl. He slid around Kagero, and drew his katana, slightly raking it across Kagero's back, inflicting a type of wound that was much like a paper cut. More of a burning annoyance than an actual injury. He flipped over Kagero, and did the same to his chest. His left foot barely touching Kagero's right, he then moved again. Swerving around to Kagero's left, his blade running thrice across the man's arm. Looking like a tiger had scratched him lightly with only 3 claws. Naruto then spun around to Kagero's left, the tip of his sword slightly leaving a cut across both shoulders of his opponent. He then sliced down Kagero's left arm, and stopped as his blade slightly pierced Kagero's foot, before moving back to his front. He then sheathed his blade, before redrawing it, and slicing across Kagero's face, leaving a wound across his nose that would scar over. He then slowly resheathed his sword. Just before the blade clicked in place to the scabbard, time seemed to resume. As the tsuba finally made the sound of tapping the scabbard, the blood finally flew. It was an intimidating sight. Asterisk. Kagero fell backwards, though the wounds weren't serious, the amount of blood would draw concern. Mira ran forward, as soon as Naruto reappeared in his starting position. Kagero! She yelled again, sprinting to the man that was helping her. She didn't even care that the man she wanted to kill was so close. She finally reached the gunblade Wilder, as he finally screamed. Naruto turned away from them, and spoke in an ear whisper, though it was heard by all. As soon as he has recuperated, ask him about my words. When you reach the place I have mentioned, you will see Sasuke again. He then walked to the barrier he set up, passing through it, as though there was nothing there. He didn't turn to see Mira carry Kagero away with some difficulty. He knew she had heard him, though he didn't appear to be concerned, and spoke to Siko. You should rest more, Harem. We will leave at first light. He sighed as he slumped back down in his chosen spot, and appeared to fall asleep. The 4 clones holding the barrier stayed, letting nothing in. And nothing would leave until Naruto wanted anything to do so. Siko nodded, though she sighed in relief when she noticed the blonde's still continuous light breathing, showing that he was still awake. She had to stop herself from moaning in lust at the sight of his power. She was able to, but didn't even know that he could smell her arousal. She then walked back to the sleeping bag, and laid down in it. She turned to watch him, before deciding to talk with him. I know what you want to ask, Siko-Harem, Naruto said, his eyes still closed. You may not like the answer, but you may ask your question. He then opened his eyes, his ringed orbs appearing as depths of emotion that was locked behind a wall, appearing to have been frozen so deeply that she wasn't sure if she could melt the ice around his heart. They also appeared to hide a wisdom that only one who had seen the end of a world could understand. Hoping to finally unravel the enigma that was Naruto, she sat up again, preparing for anything. She spoke. Naruto-kun, what happened to you? She paused, trying to find the words she wanted to say. Why did your journal seem more like a report than what should be put in such a book? Why are you so strong, and how did you become immortal? She asked, concern showing in her blue eyes. Naruto sighed, wondering why he made it seem like he didn't care about his past. He admitted mentally that he should have described more in his journal. He then heard her ask one last thing. And what was Project 1? His shoulders slumped a little at that one. He knew that all of the group was starting to wonder. Only he and his gunner knew everything about that. He sighed again, before leaning back to rest his back on the wall. I was born on October 10th. In the 3rd year of the Yondaime Hokage's reign, roughly 600 years after the shinobi era began. I can't say for sure what the year really was, as it was said that the Rakuta Sannin died shortly after the era started. We called him the first shinobi. Lab led him as a god among men. He paused, unsealing some water bottles. After giving her one, he continued. On the day of my birth, my mother was in a special place designed for Jinchuriki to give birth. My mother, Uzumaki Kushina, was the second Jinchuriki of the Kyubi no Kitsune, the chakra spirit that was called as such, because no one else knew the so-called demon's name. My father, Namikaze Minato, also known as Kanahegakure's Kuroi Senkyu, the Yondaime Hokage, was overseeing the process, to ensure that the seal wouldn't break. He paused to take a drink. That day, a man who called himself Madara broke through the barrier around the place. He managed to kill the Umbu guards and the Sandaime's wife, kidnap me, and nearly blowing the place to hell. Naruto then continued his story, pausing to drink water every now and then. Siko found herself entranced, listening as he explained what the word Jinchuriki meant. She could see images floating through her mind as he described his village in detail. She could see the people he spoke about. She could imagine the life he led, as he finally got to the tale of Sasuke's defection. She wondered briefly how he could change from such a bright and loving soul. She found herself smiling when he spoke of his nearly useless training trip with Jiraiya. His tale continued, all the way through his brief depression at the pervert's death, and to the redemption of Nagato. He then spoke of the first few months of the war. Still seeming like the man he once was to be bright. He then spoke of his brief time with Sakura. We were finally happy somewhat. I was glad that she finally resolved her feelings. Those days, nothing could bring me down. I felt invincible. Sakura-chan, at the time, was my pillar of strength. We held each other up, as though we could touch the stars, and never suffer. He paused again, draining the last of his water. On the day of that mission, the day she died, I broke. I was in sorrow and enraged. That day, Madara and Obito lost half of their forces. 4 of their Edo Tensei warriors fell in my rage. Kurama was also pissed. He completely destroyed the souls that were tethered to the corpses, and the Zetsu soldiers were erased from existence. He paused to gather a breath, and Siko noticed a single tear fall. After that day, I encloaked myself in a shield of rage. I dove into Umbu, the Black Ops forces of Konoha. After completing the mandatory training, I immediately ran headfirst into wartime S-rank missions. As you know, my squad leader was Yuzuki Yugao. I was accepted into her squad, because of my scores and throughout training, and because they had lost a member just a few days before I joined them. He then cast his gaze upward, appearing to look out into nothing, completely focused on his memories. I wasn't happy, but Yugao-chan changed that. Flashback. Most of this chapter is a big-ass flashback. Naruto sighed as he sat at the bar. He didn't really know why Yugao told him to meet her for drinks. So consumed in thoughts he would rather not think about, that he didn't even notice that Umbu captain sit next to him. She was wearing a standard civilian style of clothing. Plain blue jeans with a simple gray t-shirt. Standard shinobi sandals on her feet, and a bracelet made of silver-colored chains that had a crescent moon dangling from them. He didn't even notice her staring at his face. Naruto, himself, was wearing a pair of black jeans, and a black muscle shirt, black sandals, and the necklace from Tsunade. His eyes were darker than they used to be, appearing colder, though they appeared to be more lost in thought than she could ever hope to fathom. Yugao knew about his teammate and girlfriend. She knew the pain he was going through, but also couldn't fathom exactly how much it hurt the Jinchuriki. Her gaze was soft, as she stared at him. You appear lost, Naruto-kun, she said softly, though it was enough to bring him out of his thoughts. He glanced to her, and his cheeks turned slightly pink for being caught in a moment where he let his guard down. Gomen Yugao Daicho, he said just as quietly, after looking away from her. He didn't notice her eyes softening even more. He just looked to the bottle that was recently placed in front of him. He then grabbed it, foregoing the cup, and drinking straight from the bottle. He chugged nearly half of the sake, before setting it down and turning back to her. So, may I ask why you wanted to meet me here, Taicho? He bluntly, and almost coldly asked her. He saw her nearly flinch at his tone, but just turned back to the bottle as the bartender placed a special mixture in front of Yugao. He waited for a minute, patiently expecting an answer from the, he thought, beautiful woman beside him. He blushed a little harder at the thought. It took her a few moments to respond, and he barely caught it. I just thought you could use a night of relaxation. She paused, waiting for the younger man to respond, staring at him while precipitation slowly built up in her eyes. She nearly cried at seeing his broken eyes contemplating her words. Is he really so broken that he can't even see when others are concerned? She asked herself. Not even seeing the brief flash of concern appearing in his eyes, for but a moment, at seeing her almost release a single tear. He still couldn't stand to see a female cry. It hurt him worse than a high-powered right-hand technique. He reached for her hand, but paused halfway through, as though second-guessing about trying to comfort her. Even if he didn't know why she was crying. He could do many things after the pain invasion, but reading minds was not one of them. He decided to not even bother with it, after a moment. I may need something like that, but I need to take my mind off of things. He spoke, after turning away from her. Right now, only training and missions can do that. He said, though he also thought. Since I've never gotten past tipsy. No matter how much I drink. He then grabbed the bottle again. Yugao nodded, though she inwardly sighed. But that's not good for your body, Naruto-kun, even you know that. You shouldn't dash. She was cut off by the blonde. I can't even get drunk properly, Taicho. So what else should I fucking do? His voice was nearly a whisper, but she heard him clearly, and could feel the icy steel in his words. She actually flinched at his tone, but never removed her gaze from his face. She sighed out loud, and took her drink, taking a sip before speaking. Honestly, Naruto-kun, I don't know. She then started drinking more from her glass. They stayed there for an hour in silence. Naruto having more than 11 bottles empty, and nearly done with his 12th. Yugao had her glass refilled about 4 times, but she was tipsy. Her cheeks flushing from the alcohol. Naruto also had an ashtray near him, with about 6 cigarettes out, and working on his 7th. Yugao finally spoke, when he put the cancer stick out. Naruto-kun? What would you do if someone confessed that they love you? She asked, not even looking at him. Naruto stayed silent for a moment, contemplating the answer. After a half-minute he replied. That depends. I don't know if I could do anything right now, not since Sakura. He sighed, almost flinching at the memories. Yugao cast her gaze down as well. I suppose that you wouldn't. It's only been nearly a month and a half, she said sadly, as she still thought of hate at times. She finished her 5th round, and turned back to him. She was starting to feel the effects of drinking so much, and wondering if it was Naruto's blood, or the Kyuubi, for not letting him even get flushed from the amount he drank. Her gaze then went slightly lower, towards his defined chest. She didn't know why, but she started to think about what it would like to be held by the young man. She almost giggled at asking herself why. He is strong and handsome now. She then cast her gaze back to the side of his face that was presented to her, and let her eyes fall to his lips. I shouldn't even consider it, she thought, but wondered why she was asking herself if she shouldn't tell him how she was feeling. Will you walk me home, Naruto-kun? She asked after turning back to the bartender, and signaling the man that she was done and ready to pay. She turned back, to see Naruto nod, but pouted slightly when she saw him take her bill and paid for both. Sure, Taicho. He then stood, and offered her his hand to help her up. They left the establishment, and set out at a leisurely pace. As they walked to the shinobi housing district, that was only finished a few weeks before, Yugao never took her gaze from the blonde next to her. His gaze was cast forward, and appearing lost again. She felt her eyes moisten again, knowing that he was hurting inside, and wishing to help him. Her heart nearly broke when she saw his gaze turn to a ring he had in his pocket. Having pulled it out. It wasn't a fancy engagement ring, it was in the shape of a fox's head, while the band looked like the creature's tail. He placed the ring back in his pocket, and she could see a single tear fall from his left eye. As they approached her apartment, she came to a decision. She would tell him, and she would make sure to heal his heart, even if it brought about the end of hope for her. As they arrived at her door, she turned to him. Naruto-kun, I have something to tell you, she said as her cheeks flushed more. She was still a little tipsy, and hoped that he thought it was only because of the alcohol. I hope that you can accept this, she said before she lunged forward, grasping him and bringing his face down a little. She then kissed him chastely. Her eyes were closed, while his widened slightly. As she let go of him, she whispered, Ashidaru, Naruto-kun. She then turned and nearly ran into her apartment. As the door closed, Naruto stood there with his eyes still wide. He slowly came back to reality, and turned to head to his own apartment. What just happened? He asked himself, not expecting Kurama to be awake. Isn't it obvious, Baka? She just said that she loves you. I swear, you've gone back to being a complete retard. The fox yelled. Naruto flinched at the loud voice of the Kyubi no Kitsune, before heading home and to bed. It wasn't the average relationship. She had lost her betrothed about 3 years before. And I was still grieving over Sakura, Naruto said as he blew smoke into the air of the shrine, having lit a cigarette halfway through. She was older than I, by around 10 to 12 years. But we became happy after a while. He then glanced to Siko. She was also the one who taught me how to properly wield a single blade. He then cast his gaze back up. We had a few missions, but most were just backup and rescue ops. Though I took far more than they did before that night. Naruto grunted as he got up, having been thrown to the ground in the spar he was having with Yugao. Well, you've gotten better. I can't hold back anymore, Naruto-kun, the purple-haired woman said with a smile. It had been a few days since they went drinking, and the conversation the next morning. Yeah, well, at least I wasn't using Bai's style, he said after nursing his rib. That still hurt Yugao-chan. The Umbu captain laughed at that, before stepping up to the blonde and offering a hand and getting off his ass. She also noticed the cuts from her sword disappearing. You know, I'm a little envious of your healing ability, Naruto-kun. Naruto turned his gaze to her masked face, his own kitsune mask hiding his slight blush from her staring. Why yeah, well, I don't know if it's because of Kurama or not, so... He winced as he heard the fox nearly scream in his head. You idiot! Of course it's not me. I only heal vital wounds. Do you think I could bother to heal every little scrape you get? Stupid Uzumakis, and their stupid life force. Naruto didn't know whether to sweat drop or laugh at the fox's mumbling. He then turned back to his captain as she spoke to him. Why don't we go to the bar? It'd be nice to spend time with you. After you take a shower, of course. Naruto paused for a moment, and then nodded. Sure. I'll be there at about 1900 hours, he said before heading off. He didn't notice his captain's gaze towards his ass. I'll see you then, Naruto-kun. As he left, Naruto sighed. Damn it. I really shouldn't be anticipating anything like this. Why don't I feel like I'm betraying Sakura? He then reached into his pocket, pulling out the same ring. He stared at it, whilst moving on autopilot back to his apartment. Hopping from rooftop to rooftop, he didn't even notice as other shinobi saluted to him. He cared little for interacting with others, even if he seemed to try. He knew that Hinata was still trying to get him to accept her love. I just don't see myself with someone like that. He then put the ring back into his pocket and cast his gaze to the left, seeing the only thing that survived Pain's attack. You didn't have to go through this, did you? Damn it. He almost scoffed after turning from his father's image. He also sensed that Hinata was following him again. How the fuck does she know that I have this mask? They're supposed to have seals that block those fucking eyes. Naruto-kun! He heard her call but decided to just keep moving. He kept his pace, even when she tried to get closer. Naruto-kun, wait! He nearly growled as she called out again. For a few minutes he just put up with it, before finally stopping. He stood on top of the building just outside of the Hyuga's new compound, and turned around as she reached him. She was barely panting trying to keep up with him. Why are you following me? He asked in a monotone-like way, not even caring when she flinched as though struck. I just wanted to see if you're okay. He cut her off. I'm fine. He then turned away. Wait. She called again. Would you like to go to Akaira? He turned back to her and snarled. Leave me alone, Hinata! I'm not interested. He then shined away, not even caring if she was crying. He would continue this for a while, not knowing how stubborn she could be. I should have been more kind, and just let her down gently. But I didn't even really know how to deal with a girl who was determined to get me, Naruto said, flicking the ashes from another cigarette away from him. It would take until Yugao and I finally spent a night in my bed before she left me alone. He took another drag, and sighed after emptying his lungs of the nicotine. She drove herself to death in the war. She was a good friend, but I pushed her away. It's one of many other things that I regret. Kitsune, Tsunade said, calling Naruto by his mask. The blonde appeared kneeling before the Godame Hokage, who was tired and still injured from the fight with Madara. You and your team are given a few days' leave. Be sure to tell your captain this, and I mean you will actually relax, she said sternly. The fox-masked Naruto then stood slowly. Hi, Hokage-sama, he replied before stepping into the shadows of the office, his mask vanishing into the blackness. Leaving the office, Tsunade sighed and turned to look out the window of her office. The sun had already set, but in the shadow cast by her chair, one could see a single tear slide down her cheek. I miss her too, Gaki. I hope Yugao can pull you out of this, she whispered to the empty room. She then grabbed a bottle of rice wine and a shot glass. Anbu Training Ground 16. Naruto appeared in his team's training ground. Seeing everyone there, he walked towards them. Got orders? He heard the team's medic ask. The man's monkey-styled mask appearing to need some repair. Naruto nodded, and then turned to Yugao, the purple-haired sword mistress sheathing her blade after cleaning it. What is it, Kitsune? Naruto nearly smiled as she asked. Hokage-sama has ordered us a few days off. He spoke, officially sounding as though he had no emotion. This was the usual when they were on duty. The monkey-masked medic jumped up from his sitting position. All right. I'ma go straight home, grab some stuff, and then go to the local bar. See you all! After saying that, the man disappeared in a shunshin. The other members shook his head, before leaving in the same way. His hawk mask being the last thing to disappear. Well, this is some good news, any Naruto-kun? Yugao asked the blonde. He nodded before being grabbed. She tore both of their masks off, and then locked lips with the surprised blonde. After a moment, she stopped, before speaking again. Now we are going to go eat dinner, and then go to your apartment. Understand? Naruto shivered at her tone, and the fake innocent smile she had. Yes'm, Taicho. His voice slightly going an octave higher. Good. Now go get cleaned up, she ordered before disappearing in her personal shunshin. For flying everywhere. What am I getting myself into? He asked himself, not even paying attention to Kurama's chuckling, before also using a shunshin. Black feathers falling like dark snow around the place he just vacated. We had gone to a local sushi bar, one that had just opened up and was a bit more fancy than the normal stands, Naruto said, staring at the old fox-like ring that he had pulled from a seal in his coat. That was also the night we made love. It was just barely a week before we were sent to Nami no Kuni. She died in that country, and it was Sasuke who had pierced her heart with his sword. He then looked at Siko, and she could see a few tears falling from his eyes. It was the day that I received these eyes. And these eyes showed me that she was carrying a fetus. I killed Sasuke that day, and in my rage I put the island nation beneath the waves. Nami no Kuni was destroyed, and barely anything remained above sea level. Naruto then focused once more on his memories. A while after that day, I met Yuna, who was a Kiri Mednin. She pulled me from the darkness I had shrouded myself in. Naruto stood before Tsunade. They were in the newest forward command center. Having received Naruto's report, and seeing his new eyes from his mask's eye holes, Tsunade sighed. And this all happened only a few days ago. We saw the explosion in Nami, and feared something may have happened. She then grabbed a bottle, before asking, What of your team? Naruto stood like a statue, not even moving his eyes from her as he answered with a cold tone. Kia. The whole operation was an ambush. White Set's account was off, as there was more than the counted 400. Tsunade groaned at the news. But winced as she remembered about Yugao. Was she carrying? She asked. She saw Naruto tense, as though he would strike whoever spoke next. Hi! Tsunade then felt tears begin to form in her eyes after hearing his hesitant answer. She sighed again, and thought for a moment. We can't afford to let you have a lot of time off, but take 2 days, then report back. I'll have a new team ready for you. You will have a better combat medic. That's all I can say about them. She saw him nod, and almost ran to hug him when she saw the pain in his eyes. "You're dismissed," she whispered. After he nodded again, he disappeared in a shunshin, leaving a ring of black feathers in the office. How the hell does he do that? She wondered before opening her bottle and taking a large gulp of the drink. This is all I can do right now, Naruto. 2 days is pushing it. Shit, I forgot to tell him about Hinata. Those 2 days I was a mess. Not even my friends could try to pull me out of it, and it only got worse on the second day. My old buddy Kiba tried to beat the living hell out of me, all while screaming about how Hinata was killed, Naruto said, looking straight at the shrine statue. When we fought, I had nearly destroyed him. I made it seem like I didn't care about Hinata's death. He paused for a moment, as if trying to remember a small detail. I didn't cry that day, or for a while after. I hadn't even went to apologize after I whipped Kiba's ass. None of my friends tried to approach after that for quite a while. Siko nodded, while looking at the blonde with a few tears in her eyes. She somewhat understood about how angry he must have been at that time. How long did it take for you to push away the darkness, Naruto-kun? She asked in nearly a whisper. Naruto heard it, and looked back towards her. Honestly, I never did. I gave up on trying to look for happiness, and my sensei's wish for peace. I threw that out of the proverbial window. He answered, but then said, Yuna found me though, and she had been suffering almost as long as I had. We found comfort in each other, after we met. Alliance Black Ops Squad Team 5, ABOS Team 5, The Blades. Kitsun Taicho, we of Team 5 are assembled and awaiting orders. Sir? Spoke a voice behind Naruto that he thought sounded beautiful. Though he could tell the speaker was hiding her own pain. The newly appointed captain turned to see 3 people standing at attention. 2 women, and 1 male. The one who spoke wore Kiri's own Black Ops Forces gear, and had a mask that was decorated with crimson snowflakes and Kirigaku's emblem. Her hair reached to the middle of her back, and was a light orange color. He would have commented, but decided against it. She also carried pouches, that he could smell, contained medicinal supplies. She wore a sword on her right hip, that screamed of a wintry death. The woman to the Kiri medic's right had Kumo's own gear, and wore a face mask like Kakashi's that covered up to her nose, hiding most of her chocolate-colored skin. Her bluish-white hair covered her right eye, and the left was nearly gold. She carried 2 swords across her back that looked to be serrated cleavers. She wore her Kumo headband around her neck, and the newer Shinobi Alliance headband was grafted to the front of her uniform. Her left eye appeared to be taking him in with a bit of curiosity, but looked far more lazy than even Shikimura's eyes when he would first wake up. Naruto then gazed at the man, who he could easily tell was from IWA. The man wore red combat robes and a gray-colored vest designed like Konoha's Umbu armor. He carried 2 daggers in a black sash, and a bandolier full of professional throwing knives. He also had 3 pouches on the back of his waist. His hair was a burnt brownish color, and was swept back. His eyes were a molten orange, and seemed to be as full of life as Naruto's once were. He also had a goatee that was a darker brown than the rest of his hair, with slightly thicker brows than normal. Though they were nowhere near as bad as Guy's. He also had a pet parrot on his shoulder. The bird suddenly spoke after Naruto's inspection with the usual coo when starting. Blow up the bakas! Naruto would have laughed after the bird whistled, but didn't even feel like chuckling. Instead he stared at the woman from Kiri. Am I correct in assuming that you are our medic? He spoke in a cold tone. The orange-haired woman saluted before speaking. Hi Taicho. Naruto gazed at her mask for a few moments, before nodding and turning back to look out at the sea from the cliff they stood on. Good. Take the day to rest from your traveling. Tomorrow we will head out onto the water, so that I can see what you all are capable of. He then raised his right hand pointing to a small campfire. The bottom of his black trench coat floating slowly with the breeze. Be up and ready by 5 o'clock. Dismissed. The 3 saluted and went over to set up camp. Naruto placed his hand back into his coat pocket, but narrowed his eyes and gazed to the left. Do you feel that, Kurama? He asked mentally. Yes, Gaki. It looks like we will get to see what these new ones are capable of soon. the fox replied, as it sensed malevolence from a few miles away. The nine-tailed fox then cast its gaze upward, after cutting the connection and then sighing. I hope you can get over her, Naruto. You are even worse than when Sakura was killed. Kurama thought, before looking downwards again. You would have been a father. What would you do, Jisan Hagoromo? The fox then laid its head back down. I stayed up that night. A white Zetsu platoon was just a few miles away from our camp. It numbered around 500 of the persistent bastards, and there was only us four and another squad of jounin, Naruto said, as he lit up another cigarette. The night was still young, and he had already went through 5. His eyes were glazed over, and the pain was clearly broadcasted from the orbs that glowed in a dim and sad light. I let them rest for a few hours. The Zetsu were approaching at a steady pace. The malice I could sense from these artificial soldiers was nearly a physical force. The others felt it only when the first wave hit. Naruto took a drag, and slowly let the nicotine fester in his lungs before releasing it back out in a sigh. It was Yuna's first time facing the freaks, and if I didn't use Kurama's chakra, we all would have died. It was because of using the fox's chakra that reinforcements arrived. He then looked at Siko. Elite Jounin Hitaki Kakashi, my sensei, and the student of my father, arrived with 3 other ninjutsu specialists. Though 2 of them perished. He cast his gaze towards the rafters holding the roof over them. It happened in the span of a heartbeat. The 3 new recruits looked to their new captain, and saw him get shrouded in a glowing cloak of energy, and then felt the killing intent from multiple sources. By the time they realized that they were under attack, Naruto had already killed 3 of the white abominations. Move it! The fox-masked blonde shouted, his okatana already bisecting another, and was flashing towards a few more. They then noticed how many of the humanoid things were marching out of the tree line. The snowflake-masked medic's eyes widened as one of the Zetsu clones got inside of her guard, and ducked as it tried to punch her in the face. Shit! She mumbled, as she grabbed a kunai and sliced its neck open. The IWA demolitions expert of the squad stepped to the left, dodging a right hook from another, and slammed his right palm into the clone's chest. As he threw the Zetsu clone, his parrot screeched out, catching the attention of a few more. Fire in the hole! As the clone hit 3 more, it glowed for a split second, and then went out in a fireball, taking a few more than those it hit. The man then looked to the sword wielder of Kumo, and saw her cleave 2 in half simultaneously in a single move. The woman continued running in a serpentine pattern and cleaving around a dozen of the clones. The IWA Nin then bit his thumb and ran it across his left palm, summoning his own blade. From the smoke, a cutlass appeared, its blade glistening in the moonlight with a silvery light. The edge of the blade was sharp, and the tip looked ready to impale his opponents. Along the spine of the blade was serrated teeth, starting 6 inches off of the hilt, and running the rest of the 2.5 blade. The handguard was gold and had a parrot's depiction right in the middle, where his middle finger was. The guard was like a knuckle duster type weapon. The handle was wrapped in a red cloth that was tied at the bottom, and extended almost a foot from the handle with the 2 ends of the cloth. He then slashed to his right, just behind his field of view, cleaving a Zetsu clone's head in half horizontally. Twisting around to the left, he brought the serrated side raking across the chest of another, leaving the clone with barely an inch of skin left connecting to its spine, or at least what should have been the spine. He then noticed the clone still moving. He then grabbed one of the daggers from his belt, and stabbed the clone in the head with it. The medic of the group pulled her sword out in a quick-draw maneuver, leaving a slicing flash of silver that cleaved a Zetsu clone from the right shoulder to the left hip. The clone's yellow eye widened, as it fell in 2 paces and felt its insides being frozen. Tai Cho! The medic called as she looked towards the tree line, and nearly gasped. She saw multiple straight flash lines appearing every few nanoseconds, and watched as one clone after another was sliced into multiple paces. Holy shit! Who is this guy? She asked in thought, before dodging another clone and decapitating it. She then nearly jumped as a flash of yellow appeared behind her and decimated another Zetsu clone. Turning around, she saw the fox mask of her new captain, enshrouded in a golden glow, and deep purple ringed eyes staring into her own. Don't stop, keep moving and slicing! Head west along the cliffside, and hold out until backup arrives," he said loudly enough for the others to hear, before flashing back into the trees and getting back to slicing through Zetsu clones. "You heard the man! Move it!" she shouted to the others as she cleaved through another clone, and started moving at Jounin level speeds to the west. The other two jumped away from their own fights and ran to follow. The three only had to get rid of a few more clones before breaking through the line, and kept running as more of the clones followed them. Naruto spotted the three moving away, and also saw the clones giving chase. "Not on my watch, assholes," he said, and then moved at speeds that they couldn't see, appearing in the middle of the clones that were chasing the team. He flicked his sword from its scabbard in another quick draw, his sword taking the lives of the artificial soldiers in a flash. He then moved around another three, appearing as nothing but a streak of golden light and slicing each one 14 times, leaving nothing but sliced remains that looked like they belonged in a professional meat packing plant, and flashing away to catch up to his team. As the four of them ran, heading downhill and towards a beach, Naruto felt a familiar presence coming from it. "Well, this will help," he thought, before looking to his team. "We'll be making our stand on that beach. Stay close to the water. If you have the chakra, then move outwards until there is at least 10 feet between your feet and the shore beneath the waves," he said, knowing that the Zetsu had a bit more trouble with moving through water. "Reinforcements are close. Jounin Hatake Kakashi is moving towards us." Naruto then glanced behind his left shoulder, and moved to block an attack heading towards the team's medic. "Keep moving!" he shouted. He shot a wind bullet into the group of Zetsu, before turning back to follow his team. As they reached the shoreline of the beach, they heard the shout of two people. "Katan, dragon flame bombs!" The rest of the team turned to see a swirling vortex appear just behind them, that shot a gout of powerful flames, while another burst of fire came from the left. The flames raced into the group of Zetsu, and the team noticed a shadow clone of a legend that was keeping the portal open. They saw the form of the man who was said to have copied over 1,000 techniques. Another shadow clone dove in from above with his hand encased in lightning. They also saw one woman who wore a tan trench coat, spitting more fire from where she stood to the left. "Anko, cover!" They heard the voice of the real Kakashi shout out, as he started throwing waves of lightning-encased kunai towards another group of Zetsu clones that were running in their direction. Two more Jounin were finished flying through hand signs, one summoning a wave of wind, and the other pulling a dragon of water from the ocean. The team saw their captain joining Kakashi in decimating the Zetsu clones, and their demolitionist pulled a red ball from one of his pouches. The Iwanin threw the ball over the others, and into the trees that the Zetsu clones kept appearing from. The man's parrot suddenly cried out, before a flash of white overcame them. "Oh shit! Duck!" Everyone listened to the bird's suggestion, and dove down as the sound of thunder cried out, and then fire went up into the air in a massive explosion, igniting most of the trees. The shockwave threw many of the white abominations away from the area, and with enough force to break some of them in half on impact with other objects. Naruto looked back to the trees, and noticed some of the Zetsu clones standing back up. "Kakashi!" He spoke over his shoulder, and the copy ninja stepped up to him. "Yeah?" He then noticed Naruto tense up, as black, white, and blue chakra formed what looked like a Rasengan in the blonde's hand. "Right." Kakashi then used a shunshin to get to the others, and noticed his water user getting his spine snapped. "Everyone get out of here!" he hollered as he appeared next to the clone and severed its head from the shoulders. The newly formed squad of operatives looked to their captain for a brief second, and saw the glow from his technique. Not even bothering to answer, they ran. "The technique I used was a variant of Kurama's tailed beast bomb. I ran into the tree line after it was formed and struck one of the Zetsu clones. I also had to use Kurama's chakra to get out of there," Naruto said as drank a small amount from his water bottle. He then put his hand in front of Siko, and formed a small blackish/red ball of chakra for her to see. "Although Kurama is no longer with me, I can still use such abilities." Siko could feel the power storming through such a small thing. She could also feel the heat rise as it floated just a few inches from his palm. The explosion was on par with a hydrogen bomb, and the technique was no larger than this at that time. "No. I could probably destroy half of Japan with this. Siko's eyes widened as she looked a little more closely and saw the raging storm inside of it. The power currents of the ball were small and flowing in every direction, but she could see the blue and white particles moving at speeds that she knew even a supersonic jet would be hard-pressed to match. Half of Japan? She asked in a whisper. Naruto nodded and spoke again. If I had more chakra and compress it to an even smaller orb, with only 1/20 of my reserves, half of the earth would ignite. Siko then looked at him, after gasping. Though I could never personally do that, unless if I absolutely had to. It's a last resort. He then allowed the technique to cancel out and be reabsorbed into his palm. The blackish/red glow and the temperature dropped back to normal. Naruto sighed before getting back into his story. After that, my team and I made our way back to command. It was there that I learned their names. I also found out about our medic's depression. They were Mira from Kumo, Jean from IWA, and Yuna from Kiri. He sighed again and pulled out another cigarette. We had many assault and demolition-type missions. Quite a few bandit raids too, since Obito saw fit to rope criminals into his army. Yuna and I grew close after a little while. We connected a bit. She had lost her brother and sister-in-law when the second company was attacked. Her parents were killed by bandits before the war, and most of her friends also fell in various other battles. He sighed again, before grabbing another smoke, lighting it, and briefly wondering why he started that small habit. After nearly 2 weeks, we were sent on a mission. It was supposed to be a high rank, but Obito showed up personally. We are tasked with the destruction of a small fort that is located close to the border of Tsuchinokuni. This fortress contains mainly bandits, but is rumored to have a few nuke-nin as well, Naruto said, as he stood before his team. His stature was rigid, and Yuna thought his back was as straight as a board. We currently have no idea if they have joined Akatsuki or not. However, the locals have appealed to the daimyo of Earth for someone to take them out. He then grabbed a map from his pouch that showed the border of the land of Earth and the land of waterfalls. There was a circled area just east of the borderline. The fort is roughly 4 miles west of a small farming village that has been attacked a few times in the past month. Naruto then pulled his mask off and grabbed a cigarette. Our main objective is to destroy the fort and slaughter the criminals. However, we are to also obtain any information on whether or not the nuke-nin, if there are any, have decided to join Akatsuki. He said, as he looked into the faces of each team member. Gear up, and be ready to move out by dusk. We'll come up with a stratagem after scouting the place. Dismissed. Jean and Mira stood before heading out of the small briefing room. Yuna stayed behind, however, hoping to speak with the blonde. Taicho, if I may? The blonde looked up from the map towards the team's medic, a stream of smoke flowing up from his cancer stick and leaving a thin sheet in the room. What is it, Yuna? He asked, sounding tired. She also took note that he looked it too, as she could spot a light coloring of blue around his eyes, just barely visible in the light. She paused for a moment, trying to find the right words. If we find the nuke-nin known as Sakamura Shuriken B-Class in this mission, please allow me to kill him by myself. The woman, who was only a little younger than him, said, with a resolve that he could easily recognize. He thought of it for a few minutes, staring straight into her chocolate-brown eyes before sighing. Tell you what. If he is in this fort, and you get the chance, I'll allow you to gut him. If, and only if, he is alone and you have the chance to stab him in the back. Otherwise, you wait for one of us to get there to watch your back. He finally said as he crushed his cigarette into the floor. I will not allow you to throw your life away just for something as petty as revenge. If I can help it, you 3 will not fall in any mission, he said. Yuna frowned for a moment. Didn't you seek vengeance once before? She asked, though regretted it as she saw him harden his gaze. I may have, but it is my job to lead you through any mission and get back alive, he growled. Get prepped. We leave when the sun sets. Yuna saluted and walked away. Naruto sighed as he watched her leave. But even I still want revenge. I just can't let it consume you, he thought, as he looked back to the map. I'll have to be vigilant. Something doesn't feel right with this. He then grabbed his mask, placing it on his face, and left the room. Heading through the tight corridors of the bunker they had taken residence in, on his way to the entrance, he would wait for the others, and plan for the information that they didn't have. As he stepped out of the cliffside entrance, he palmed a certain kunai. On the handle was writing that most would think was just gibberish. I'll at least be able to test this in battle. The kunai wasn't as fancy as his father's, but it wasn't as plain as normal either. The writing on the handle could also be covered with another layer of the standard gwaza that was normally wrapped around the throwing weapons. Hiration, the flying thunder god. Will I be as good as you were too, San? He asked himself, but couldn't answer, even if he could talk to the man again. Naruto didn't need the jutsu to move at insane speeds on the battlefield, he did have Kurama after all. I will only need this to extract my team, and get back. But I want to uphold this legacy by mastering it. He thought with as much conviction as he used to show throughout his young life. He then threw one into the dirt, and turned to the guardsmen of the base. Make sure that stays there. The shinobi saluted, as Naruto turned to head back inside. 3 hours later. The sun had finally gone below the horizon. Naruto's team jumped through the trees, utilizing the age-old shinobi of the forest's method of travel. They made nary a sound, even when their feet touched down to leap again. The breeze that wound through the trees was cooler than normal due to being so close to the land of waterfalls. Naruto never really cared why the climate changed so drastically when crossing borders to other countries, and it didn't appear to affect him as it did Jin and Mira. Yuna appeared to be a little more comfortable in the cooler climate. Naruto stopped and raised his hand. The others stopped as well, each being hidden by the shadows and the leaves, already bringing their chakra levels down, so as not to alert anyone of their presence. Only a trained sensor would spot them. Keep to the shadows. If you take out a patrol or watchman, hide the corpse, he signed to them, using his hands. He didn't even need to look to see if they acknowledged the order. Dem up. Lay charges along the gates. When all watch is out, regroup, set off, He heard Jin set off, his parrot landing on the blonde's shoulder. The others would strike any watchman from the shadows. They did have an advantage, as the edges of the tree line was closer than it should have been. No one had used this base, except for bandits, in many years. Medic. Keep watch. Circle left. Drop him in 2, He signed to Yuna, and then signed Mira to go right. He felt them leave, as he looked ahead to the gates. Noticing Jin place his last 2 charges, the blonde threw 5 kunai above the wall. His kunai landed in the throats of 4 archers, while the last quietly stuck into the head of one that was replacing one of the 4 he hit. He then looked back to Jin, as the Iwanin came back to his position. Wait till drops are confirmed, He signed to the demolitionist. They waited nearly 2 minutes, until their shortwave radios clicked twice. Naruto raised his hand in front of Jin, and then clenched his fist. Jin nodded, and raised his hands into the ram's seal. Katsu! The man whispered. Naruto grabbed him and used Shunshin to get them past the wall as the charges went off. Naruto appeared with Jin on side of the tallest tower, using a minimal amount of chakra to stick to the stone. Regroup up top with the others. Jin nodded, and ran up the side, avoiding the windows and any openings for archers. Naruto sighed, and made 3 clones, though winced as the thrice-damned shared vision opened with them. It's worse than dispelling 1,000 clones at once, he grumbled mentally. He watched as he saw many bandits surrounded the smoking ruins of the gate, also noticing 2 Chunin-level signatures amongst them. His eyes then widened, when for a brief moment, he felt a signature he had forced himself to get acquainted with. He felt a drop of sweat run down his brow, even as the signature disappeared. Obito's here? How the hell? He put his hand to his ear, and spoke quietly into the radio. Fall back. Operation compromised. Fake Madara is in the fort, we cannot engage him. He then stiffened as he felt Jin's signature drop cold in his sensing range. He also felt the other 2 on top of the tower. Shit! He grimaced as he activated Kurama's chakra, and shot up the tower. He made it up in time to see the fake Madara stab Mira in the chest from behind. Well, hello, Naruto. So glad to see you. Tell me, did it trouble you when you murdered your best friend? The man spoke, as Naruto flashed in front of Yuna. Did it trouble you when you murdered your sensei Obito? Naruto retorted, as he drew his blade. The two stood facing each other. Discreetly, Naruto activated a barrier around the roof of the tower, as he noticed a masked man about to teleport. I'm afraid your eyes won't help you escape. Naruto spoke, and settled into a stance where he held his sword with two hands at his left hip. His right foot in front, and shoulders relaxed. So it would seem. I am impressed that you have gotten so far in Fuinjutsu. The now known Obito then pulled a tanto from his hip. Let us see if you can rival your father. He spoke, before shooting forth to engage the blonde. Of all the opponents I've ever faced, Uchiha Obito was the hardest to fight. It was never because he was powerful, for he was strong, but the kicker was hitting him. The barrier I placed wouldn't let him teleport away using his thrice-damned Sharingan, but he was still able to make himself intangible. Naruto said, after lighting another cigarette. Hitting the bastard was a chore, and even then one still had to break through his armor. He wasn't a master of seals, but he at least knew how to make his armor stronger. Not to mention that robe of his, it wouldn't even tear. Naruto clenched his right hand slightly, and then looked at Siko. The sword woman had taken to sitting next to him, her head resting on his right shoulder, though she was still awake. She rubbed his arm, with an absent mind. Naruto stared at her hand, as it brought a little comfort to him. The Alliance only learned who he really was a few days prior, and Kakashi-sensei was in turmoil. Obito had originally been on a team with Kakashi-sensei, and had given the legendary copycat his eye a few years before I was born when they were nearly killed on a mission in the Third War. Obito was thought to have died then. Naruto spoke with a small amount of anger in his voice at the last sentence. He felt Siko grip his arm, letting him know that she could feel his anger. That battle, on top of that tower, was hell. I had also made a second barrier around Yuna, who was able to grab Mira away from the fight as it started. Jean was already gone, but we were able to get to Mira in time to save her. Obito had only pierced a lung, Naruto said, before continuing in a whisper. I thank Kami that we were able to. His eyes then glazed over. It was after that fight, when we were able to get out alive, that Yuna and I started our relationship. Though it wasn't really one until later. He chuckled, though there was no mirth in it. Obito was a bastard, though I should consider myself lucky that Madara wasn't there. Naruto's blade sliced through the air, at a speed that even Obito was having trouble following. Naruto snarled as his blade slipped through the Uchiha's intangible state. The fox mask that Naruto wore was in paces from only a few minutes into the fight. It had already been over 20 since the start. He's getting faster, and I'm almost at my limit, Obito thought, before forcing himself to dodge a swipe that was almost glowing purple. What? He screamed as he saw blood flow from his left arm. Naruto's form then disappeared in a bluer to Obito's Sharingan. Yuna had already healed Mira, as best as she could with her limited supplies. The wound had taken more chakra than she thought in order to close it enough for the lung to work. She then looked up towards her Taicho, and saw something she would always remember. Naruto grasped his blade, having returned it to its sheath. His form kneeling while facing the masked Uchiha. Suddenly a flash of purple surrounded the two fighters, before Naruto's form disappeared. She then heard the blonde's whisper. Die. As that single word resounded with the force of gong, a dark mist surrounded Obito. He appeared to freeze as hundreds of slash marks appeared around him, and then Naruto reappeared. He was kneeling, and had his eyes closed. His sword slowly being sheathed in front of his face. He then breathed out, and finished sheathing his blade. As the sound clinking metal rung out, flashes of light appeared behind him in perfect lines, all appearing to go through the masked Uchiha. Naruto knew that it wasn't fatal, but he smirked as he then held his hand out. An object fell into his hand with a wet plopping noise. Yuna saw Naruto smirk as he held the small thing out in front of him. I believe this is the second time you've lost one of these. Am I right, Obito? She then heard the man gasp, before screaming in rage and flooding the area with a killing intent that she never could have believed to exist. "Damn you, Naruto! I will kill you, mark my words!" The masked Uchiha then jumped away, and through the barrier, retreating while clutching the right side of his face. The white mask fell before them, having been discarded by Obito when he tried to nurse his wound. Yuna looked towards Naruto's hand, and gasped. In Naruto's palm was an eye, with an iris that was red and had 3 distinct markings in a circle around the pupil. He then crushed the offending object, with a chuckle, before throwing the remains on the ground. Naruto turned to the medic, and released his barriers. He approached Yuna, and the wounded Mira, holding his hand out to them. "Let's get out of here," he said before grabbing both, and disappearing in the flash shadows. Chapter end.
Now watch daily exclusive uncensored lemon stories and mature content, along with NSFW images, featuring harem girls characters from the fics. Access all this and more on my Patreon. Click the link in the description to explore.